Hello, this is some guy in Hawaii, and today we're looking at Action Skill Cooldown and how to best minimize it. I don't know of any build or anybody that doesn't want more cooldowns, so we'll define Action Skill Cooldown and explain how it works. We'll cover Vault Hunter specific cooldown resources as well as gear, perks, and ornaments available to all Vault Hunters, and then we'll hit some very general strategies for maximizing cooldown in the most efficient way. It's not as straightforward as you might think, but it's not that complicated either. Additionally, there are mini skills that have their own cooldowns but are not, to my knowledge, affected by Action Skill Cooldown modifiers. Flak's Attack Command, or Zayn's Drone Delivery, or Best Served Cold, for example. We're not covering those, just the main action skills. Lastly, the new skill trees, as revealed, already include additional cooldown modifiers, some of them possible game changers. They don't, however, change the underlying math, and I'm not going to cover them here. That is why this is part 1. Part 2 will go out sometime after November 10th. After I and enough players in general have had time to test all these new skills and possible ornaments and possible class mods. Remember, what we saw skill tree wise on the 20th and 22nd of October are beta trees. Gearbox might make changes before 10th November. Action Skill Cooldown is the time it takes to recharge our action skill between activations. A few skills like Flak's Rack Attack or Amara's Avatar allow multiple activations per charge. These do not affect cooldown time, they just provide for additional activations during the cooldown period. Additionally, different action skills have different durations. Cooldown, however, does not begin until the actual action skill duration ends. A good way to visualize cooldown is filling a bucket with water, an analogy I will use a lot. The bucket starts empty, and then under a faucet it starts filling with water. The action skill is charging up or cooling down, however you want to describe it. When the bucket is full, we can activate our action skill. Now this is the cooldown formula for any Vault Hunter action skill. This determines the actual time it takes to recharge a skill. Now in the top of the formula, base cooldown period is what's listed in the skill description. These are all the current action skill base cooldown periods. This is also the size of the bucket. The larger the bucket, the longer the base cooldown time. The bottom of the formula is cooldown rate. This is how fast the bucket fills from the faucet. Without any modifiers, this figure is 1, and the actual cooldown time equals the listed base cooldown period. Now, cooldown period and cooldown rate modifiers are obviously how we go about reducing actual cooldown. Cooldown period modifiers subtract from the base cooldown period in set increments. This is analogous to suddenly dumping water into the bucket in addition to letting the faucet run. Cooldown rate modifiers increase or occasionally decrease this bottom number, speeding up or slowing down the actual rate at which cooldown proceeds. This is analogous to opening up or closing down the faucet, increasing or decreasing the flow of water into the bucket. Now you might think all we have to do is plug in the modifiers we get from skills or gear or perks and bam, get our reduced cooldown figure, but that rarely works. Because while some of these modifiers, specifically some rate modifiers, are constant and always on and can simply be plugged in, others are temporary, typically lasting 8 to 12 seconds. Many period and rate modifiers are also conditional, requiring us to do something or maintain a specific condition. A temporary cooldown rate modifier will only speed up cooldown, open up that faucet for 8 to 12 seconds, then it will close it back down. A conditional modifier that requires us to kill enemies to proc means we have to kill enemies. Can we do that consistently during the cooldown period? How many enemies must we kill? What if we don't have a lot of easily killable enemies running around like during some boss battles? Some builds depend upon the ability to decrease cooldown, and the ability to decrease cooldown depends on the build and how it's played. It's a somewhat complex relationship that makes crafting a good build an interesting challenge. There's one other aspect of cooldown reduction we also need to consider, and that's the concept of cooldown rate modifiers and diminishing returns. Because of the way the equation is structured, the amount of reduction in our actual cooldown time decreases as we increase our cooldown rate. The amount that this decreases goes down as this number gets bigger. Now that's probably confusing, so let me illustrate. Let's take Amara's Ties That Bind with the listed 18-second cooldown. Base cooldown rate, as mentioned earlier, is 1. If we add a constant plus 40% cooldown rate modifier, our rate becomes 1.4. 40% of 1 is 0.4, because that's how you add percentages. So 1 plus 40% is 1.4. We do the math, and our cooldown now takes 12.9 seconds. We have reduced our cooldown by 5.1 seconds. If we add another plus 40% modifier, the cooldown rate becomes 1.96 because 40% of 1.4 is 0.56. That's how we normally add percentages. Okay, 1.4 plus 0.56 is 1.96. Cooldown now takes 9.2 seconds, and we reduced our cooldown by a further 3.7 seconds. Okay, if we add another 40 plus 40%, cooldown drops to 6.6 seconds with another 2.6 seconds removed. Our cooldown is now a little more than a third of the original value, which is great, but look a little deeper. The first 40% removed 5.1 seconds. The second removed 3.7 seconds. The third 2.6. I've done the math, and the next two are 1.9 and 1.4 seconds. For the same amount of increase to cooldown rate, plus 40% in this example, we get progressively less cooldown reduction. We went from 5.1 to 1.4. This is diminishing returns. And it's important because, like everything else in this game, choosing to decrease cooldown usually means choosing not to do something else. When we choose to add another piece of gear or skill point specifically to improve cooldown rate instead of something else, we need to keep diminishing returns in mind. Adding another 30%, and most rate modifiers at level 65 are between 25 and 40%, may only shave off another second or two from our cooldown. Is that really worth it? Or might we want to spend those skill points elsewhere or equip a different piece of gear? Okay, I'll come back to this when we discuss general strategies. Amara has one skill and two augments that affect cooldown. Restless is a tier 2 straightforward always on boost to cooldown rate plus 5% per skill point. Aside from the point cost, there's no downside. Most builds that take it max it out, but that's up to you. Okay. Stillness of Mind and Glamour, conversely, are both augments that actually increase overall cooldown time by 15 and 20% respectively. That's a downside to each augment we might want to consider, okay, when we equip them. Amara's Golden Rule class mod per the text grants a temporary cooldown rate increase anytime an enemy damages her. Now, it has no damage boost like other comms. The wording is deceptive, however, because any damage to Amara will work, including self-damage. And per the text, it stacks. There are builds that make use of this perk to get ridiculous cooldown and big damage. I'm talking about you, Moxie. Point is, this is not a class mod we equip to just get cooldown. The Golden Rule requires a build constructed around it to reduce cooldown consistently. Now, Flak has Eager to Impress and Head Count, skills that both reduce cooldown period by inflicting damage. Eager to Impress removes small amounts of time for kills by both Flak and his pet. Head Count has a maximum 30% chance to do the same when critting. Okay. Head Count combined with Megavore and a high rate of fire, high pellet count shotgun is a standard tactic for speeding up cooldown for fadeaway and gamma burst builds. Flak's Rackcelerate augment, while always on, only affects Rack Attack. Then again, Rack Attack's base cooldown is pretty fast. To begin with, most people take it for the additional charge. The plus 20% cooldown rate boost is more of a nice to have extra. As for Zayn Adrenaline, despite being tier 1, is avoided by most Zayn builds. Its max 35% cooldown rate boost is actually scaled to his shield and requires him to keep it close to full to be effective. Most builds spend their points elsewhere, namely to increase skill duration. Speccing into Good Misfortune with a See and Dead class mod can allow Zayn to keep his action skills up almost indefinitely, and once all the mobs are gone, cooldown is not an issue. Alternatively, Zayn does have Calm, Cool, and Collected, which technically does not increase cooldown, it eliminates it. It fills the bucket immediately if Zayn freezes an enemy while both his shield and health are full. It's not so much a cooldown modifier as a build playstyle all in itself. You have to commit to constructing your build and combat around it, but when done properly, it pretty much eliminates cooldown until we run into a cryo-immune enemy. All-Rounder allows Zayn to pick up his bear in exchange for a 20% increase to overall cooldown time, same as with Amara's Stillness of Mind and Glamour. Again, it's a downside to the augment we should at least be aware of. Lastly, Zayn's Techspert class mod grants a 5% chance to reset Sentinel's cooldown after a kill. Now, given Sentinel's 60-second base cooldown, that's no small thing. Then again, the See and Dead class mod, by extending the duration of all action skills, essentially does the same thing. Moz has Grizzled, a tier 1 skill that reduces cooldown period for every kill during the cooldown period. Maxed out, the first kill removes just under 5 seconds, with successive cools removing 90% of the time saved by the previous kill. Now, despite these built-in diminishing returns, it's an excellent skill that synergizes well with other cooldown perks, especially since kills by auto bear count. Most builds spend at least 3 points here to make it worthwhile. Explosive Punctuation, by contrast, is avoided by most Mo's mains. This tier 1 skill reduces cooldown rate by a small amount for a short period of time every time Mo's does splash damage. Now, despite Mo's penchant for splash, however, the small temporary nature of the boost requires constant proccing to be effective. Keeping it up almost always requires Mo's to be in enemy fire and miss out on topped off. Most builds spend their tier 4 skill points elsewhere. Okay. Mo's also has her own weapon and skill anointment specifically aimed at reducing action skill cooldown rate. It's plus 20% for a short time for every kill after exiting Iron Bear. Now, despite the size and temporary nature of the perk, it synergizes well with Grizzle, and if taken, it's best equipped on a shield, as there are generally much better anointments competing for space on our equipped weapon. Those are all the Vault Hunter specific cooldown rate modifiers. The following modifiers are available to all Vault Hunters. Topping the list, no pun intended, is the Guardian rank perk Topped Off, which gives the single biggest cooldown rate reduction in the game at 200%. With nothing else in play, no cooldown period mods and no other cooldown rate modifiers, this can reduce our cooldown by 2/3. Okay, 1 plus 200% is 3, and anything divided by 3 is 1/3 of what it started out as. Okay, this opens up the faucet big time when it's working. And since it's a Guardian rank perk, it costs us nothing except playing the game long enough to get 50 Guardian rank points to get to it. Okay, we don't have to give up anything skill point or gear wise to get it. There is, however, a catch. In order for it to work, our shields must be full. Anytime our shield takes a hit, the faucet closes way back down, and it doesn't open back up until our shield is fully charged again. Okay, if you ever glanced down at the cooldown indicator and it was counting down and it suddenly seemed to freeze on one number, or even go back up a number, it was probably topped off going down because your shield took a hit. Any build that depends on topped off has to address keeping one shield full and getting it back up quickly when it takes a hit. This has implications for other cooldown rate modifiers, giving diminishing returns. With topped off working, other lesser modifiers don't do as much. Okay, they don't matter as much. They may shave off only a second or two. With topped off down, however, and because of diminishing returns, those other modifiers become more important. While we're on the subject of free cooldown modifiers, this Guardian rank stat also only costs Guardian rank points, and it's always on. Now, it appears to max out at 13.01%, so not a lot, but if we're going for topped off, both are in the Hunter tree, and we can add to one while going for the other. Gear-wise, cooldown rate passives are often downplayed when choosing class mods and artifacts, despite the fact that they are always on. If we can't depend on keeping our shield up to maintain topped off though, or we don't want to or can't use Guardian rank, they can take on increased importance. Class mod and artifact passive percentages vary depending upon level. At level 15, a single class mod passive is plus 10% to cooldown rate. At level 65, it's plus 39%. Artifact cooldown rate is plus 30% at level 65. Now, class mod and artifact passives can also stack, meaning they can have at least two passives increasing cooldown rate that combine into one, although they are rare. Class mods with this double bonus actually show a plus 36% cooldown rate stat at level 65, but the actual rate is more like 48-49%. I've yet to find an artifact with a double cooldown stat. Now, the plus Ultra Shield and its non-legendary cousin, the Limit Break, both have a 20% chance, if hit by a bullet, to increase action cooldown rate by 20% for several seconds. 20% is not much. We have to get hit by a bullet first, and it's a 1 in 5 chance to proc. And then it only lasts for a few seconds. I'm guessing 8 to 12. I do not know if it stacks. I have not been able to test this ability. Okay, most people currently take these shields for their hidden ability to double the wearer's health and Iron Bear's armor in the case of most. These are only available from the Krieg DLC, DLC 4. Okay. Lastly, there is an on-action skill and anointment similar to the most specific one. This one is plus 20% for a short time, about 8 to 12 seconds. It's a small, actually it's about 8 seconds. It's a small temporary one-time perk. Okay, there are much better anointments for a shield. No one I know recommends this anointment. Now that's everything I know of, although I may have missed the shield ability in there somewhere. Apologies if that happened. As for general strategies for efficiently minimizing cooldown time, I must emphasize again that cooldown and build playstyle are two sides of the same coin that must work together. These are choices you're going to have to make for your individual build, but I can provide several guidelines. First off, understand the difference between cooldown period and cooldown rate modifiers and how they work. Okay, understand the formula and understand how each piece of gear or perk fits in a particular spot. Okay. Additionally, understand the difference between constant and/or temporary and/or conditional modifiers. Okay. Constant cooldown rate boosters are the easiest way to go. They do require us to expend skill points or allocate a class mod or artifact passive, but since they are always on, we need not worry about them once equipped. Conditional and/or temporary modifiers, by contrast, must be integrated into our playstyle and combat cycle. Whether it be kills, crits, or maintaining a full shield, that needs to be part of our strategy. Understand cooldown rate diminishing returns. Okay, cooldown percentage in constant versus temporary versus conditional matters, but so does the combined effect of all rate modifiers in play. Now, this table shows the resulting cooldown for various skills with different cooldown rates in 10% intervals. This may help you understand better how what you're doing improves your cooldown or doesn't. Okay, using our previous example, let's start with 2 plus 40% cooldown rate modifiers. This gives a 1.96 cooldown rate, which is this column, or sorry, this row right here. I rounded down. If we add another plus 40%, we get a cooldown rate of 2.34. Again, I rounded down this particular row. If for Zayn using Sentinel, we went from 31.6 seconds to 26.1 seconds. That last 40% boost shaved off 5.5 seconds. If we're Amara using Ties That Bound, however, we go from 9.5 to 7.8 seconds, a less than 2 second difference. Okay, that's what the 40% boost gave us at that point. I'm going to post this table on Google Docs with the link in the description below, but remember, this table only considers cooldown rate, the bottom of the formula, and assumes a constant rate. Okay, adjust your expectations accordingly and test out your build cooldown in actual combat. And that's everything to the best of my knowledge, at least until the new skill trees come out or if Gearbox makes other adjustments. Okay, now if you like this content and want to see more, give me a like or comment and consider subscribing. You can also always find me live streaming currently these days at twitchtv.com/SumOfGuy in Hawaii. Stay safe and thanks for watching.